Hi everyone, my name is Sam Pretorius and I'm a counselling psychologist, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about my journey of the selection process to get into masters. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of context as to what led to that point in my studies. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life after school, and I initially applied for teaching, and then I changed it in the December to pharmacy, and then in the January I changed it to psychology. And the reason I avoided psychology was I'd heard horror stories about how everyone starts psychology and no one becomes a psychologist, which yeah, it really put me off. So I avoided psychology, and then I decided to actually just give it a bash. And then I'll never forget, in one of my first lectures in educational psychology, my lecturer, I can still remember his name and face, asked us. Now, I was sitting in a big public university. Oh, I studied in Port Elizabeth. I went to what was UPE, it's now the Nelson Mandela University. I was sitting in a big lecture of a couple of hundred psych students, and I was 19 years old, and he said, "Who of you want to become psychologists?" So, of course, we all put our hand up. And he said, "I'm sorry to break it to you, but about 5% of you will become psychologists." And I was heartbroken for a little while. And then I decided, no, I am going to go on a mission from today to be one of that 5%. And so I did. And something else that made me go the psych route when I first avoided it because of the fear of not getting into masters was I became aware of the B-Psych program. And I decided that would be my route. So just to start off with, I first did 2 years of BA Psych, and then at the end of my second year, I applied for third and fourth year of the B-Psych program, which is the registered counselling program, which I got into, and then so my third and fourth year were B-Psych, so I ended up with a B-Psych degree, and became a registered counsellor, well, could have gone on to become a registered counsellor, but I went on and did my master's. So just to say some of the things that I decided to do in order to up my chances when I made that decision that I will be one of that 5% was I worked incredibly hard, okay, very, very hard, to my social life's detriment. But I made sure I got very high grades, distinctions across all my modules. I did 2 years of isiXhosa to try and expand my language proficiency. I did a lot of volunteer work, a lot of community work. I also did additional counselling courses at NGOs like Lifeline and FAMSA and places like that. And I did some work experience, I shadowed people, and I did practical hours in fields related to psychology, because it's very hard to get actual psych experience. And I also had a job, a part-time student job, not in the field at all, but just to show that I could handle the pressure of studying full-time and working. So I made it my mission to become one of the few people to make it into a master's program. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because this isn't something you can decide in your honours year. Next year I'm going to apply for my master's and get in. It's a long process, and you need to just be realistic with yourself and know that you've got to put a lot of work and groundwork into it. It doesn't just happen the year before a master's intake takes place. So I'll speak you through my process. So it's my experience. It may have changed over the years. I'm sure it has. And this is my experience, but hopefully you can take something away from it, and just to hear how someone else's experience was might just be useful to you. So this was in 2009. So I was in my fourth year of my B-Psych program, and then I applied for the 2010 intake of master's students. So at NMMU, where I studied, you can either apply for the clinical or the counselling program. You actually all sit in one class, interestingly enough. There were 10 of us and we all sat together. Our internships just differed, but you chose which stream you wanted, and I chose the counselling stream. And so the first hurdle to get over was the first round, where we had to write an autobiographical essay and submit our marks. I actually found my essay on my laptop the other day when I was transferring from one laptop to the other, and it was interesting to read it. And so when I was thinking about that in preparation for this, I think it was very important that I was real and authentic, honest about life. I hadn't lived a particularly difficult life in many regards, and initially I thought that was going to hold me back, but I have had some hardships that I was able to include, which I think they appreciated that I was able to recognize those and process them. So I think what's important to look at is that they're not looking for a person with a perfect life or no challenges or a whole bunch of challenges, but someone who has processed challenges and has insight and developed from them. So that was first, so that was grades and an autobiographical essay. And so then I got through that round, and then it was psychometric assessment, a case study, and a research task. So as far as I know, psychometric tests have been taken out of selection processes in accordance with the HPCSA's recommendations. But in my day, we did personality inventories. We did the MMPI, and I think we did the NAO. I can't really remember. I didn't know what I was doing at the time because I had studied them, but we had to do those. So that involved hundreds of questions on computer, and then they got a printout of our personality profiles. So there was that, and then we had to do a case study. So basically we were put into a room and we were shown a video of a potential client, a woman, and describing her difficulties, and then we had to do a case conceptualization. What issues was she presenting with? What pathology could we identify? What approaches to an intervention you could take? What your goals would be, etc., etc. So there was that, and then there was also a research task. So we were given a hypothetical research scenario. We had to come up with a methodology, a sampling method. What else? Describe whether we would use qualitative or quantitative methodology and why. Come up with a topic. Look at ethical challenges or ethical implications of the research, etc. So there was that. And then the last round that we got to was we were invited then for individual interviews. So my university didn't do group interviews. I know a lot of them do, but we had individual interviews. So that was incredibly nerve-wracking. You walk into the class or into the room, and there's a chair and a glass of water and a box of tissues, which was quite indicative of what may come. And then in a U shape, there were about 10 psychologists interviewing us. So it was the lecturers as well as people from the internship sites, psychologists from the internship sites. And there, I think it was about an hour, can't really remember, it was a long time ago. But basically they discussed everything that had come out through the autobiographical essay, the psychometric tests, the case study, etc., etc. And we discussed those results, and you had to explain certain things and why you think something came out the way it did, or your rationale for A, B, and C. Something I was grateful I was warned about, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I was warned. I actually, so maybe this is some advice, I approached a master's student a few years ahead of me, took her out for a cup of coffee and asked her to share her experience with me. So, but I guess you're getting that through this event that SACAP's put together. And one of the things she had warned me about was she said that certain lecturers took on different roles. So I'll never forget, there was one lecturer who sat there with his arms folded, looking up at the ceiling, looking like I completely bored him to death. Apparently that was a persona he was playing. I don't know if it's true or not, but thankfully someone had told me that, so I wasn't too put off by him, because otherwise I would have felt very uneasy thinking I was boring this man to death with my life story. So they asked us a whole bunch of questions based on that. I think, again, like the autobiography, the most important thing was to be real and authentic. You've got 10 psychologists watching you and speaking to you and interrogating you. So I think if you're not, someone's going to pick it up, and you don't want discrepancies between what was in your autobiography or in your assessment and then what comes out in your interview. I didn't need to use the tissues, which was probably a good thing. But it actually, some people describe it as traumatic and so difficult. I didn't find it that way. Yes, there were tough questions that I had to grapple with, but nothing that was unfair or uncalled for. And then we also had to put in, as preparation for that, they'd warned us, we had to do some type of, they called it a family sculpture, so some type of creative representation of your family system. I've heard of people doing a whole bunch of different things. I've heard of people making a fruit salad and each fruit represents a different person. I've heard of people using clay or Lego. I did a taken a collage. It was a tactile collage, so I had a huge piece of cork, and then I made a collage about my family, and it was very tactile. So, for example, my mom loves tennis, so I had like half a tennis ball stuck on, and my dad works in finance, so I had money stuck on, and then showed the different relationships between different people, etc., etc. So that they also unpacked with me. So that was my process, and then I was very, very grateful to get a phone call one day when I was at my practicum site. I was still doing my BPsych practicum, to get a phone call to say, congratulations, we have a place for you, which was an absolute dream come true. Just a few things I wanted to say, just like I said already, be authentic, be realistic. I was very fortunate to go straight from my undergrad or my fourth year into masters, but that isn't the norm. So just be prepared for that. You need to have some backup plans, and it doesn't mean that because it doesn't happen the first time, it's never going to happen. I've got many friends who applied a second or third time and got in. They did things in the interim, like work, get experience, volunteer, do a research masters. That's also quite a popular way to fill the gap between the two studies, or those two, between masters and honors. But just prepare your heart for disappointment. I went in there saying I've got nothing to lose. It would be amazing if I got in. If I didn't, my then boyfriend, now husband, and I were going to go to South Korea and go teach English, and I was equally as excited about that prospect. So to me, it would be wonderful if I get in. If I don't, I love my other option. And so just have some other options, and yeah, I think that's something I'd like to say. Oh, the other thing I just wanted to perhaps mention is to be able to justify why you have applied to the universities you've applied for. So for me, I only applied to one university, the one where I studied, and that was a question that came up, if you want this so badly, why haven't you applied everywhere? But I had been very intentional about only applying to NMU because the way I thought about it, I'd heard horror stories about how hard your master's years are, and I had my family in PE, my long-term boyfriend in PE. I didn't want to go start off life again, like go to UJ and start off life in a city I didn't know, with people I didn't know, university I didn't know, etc., etc. So for me, it made a lot more sense for me to say, no, I'd rather put all my eggs in one basket. I want to get in here. If I don't get in here, I don't get in here. But I just thought it would be a good decision to study in a place that I knew and felt comfortable. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you can't move to a new city and go study there. Of course you can, people do it all the time, but it worked for me. I found my master's years very draining on an energy level, emotional level, on relationships, etc., etc. Practical, like in terms of cooking and cleaning and all the rest. I was very grateful to have my family down the road. I could drop off a load of laundry, and my mom could drop off a meal. I was very, very grateful to have that. So it worked for me, but it doesn't work for everyone. So that's my experience, and I hope it adds some value, and my insights can be helpful to you. So good luck, and take care. Bye-bye.